Welcome to the COVID Chronicles YYC. I'm Denise Summers of Infor Communications, a local business storyteller and communications consultant. Today we're talking to Kim Blanchette, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Argyle, Argyle's Western Division. And Argyle is a communications, reputation, and engagement advisory firm with offices across Canada. And so welcome, Kim. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Denise.
Yeah, and so tell me about you and about Argyle, and about your role with Argyle.
Sure. Yeah, so Argyle really is an interesting story. You know, they're one of the fastest growing independently owned communications firms in the country. Really sprung from Argyle, which was run by Dan Tish out of Toronto. You know, a 40-year-old, kind of what you would see as a traditional public relations and communications firm. And in 2019, they joined forces with Context, which was one of the leading public engagement firms in Western Canada with offices in BC and Alberta. And they also joined forces with Changemakers, which was a creative social marketing firm in Winnipeg. And then towards the end of that process, they added Matchstick, which is one of the leading boutique digital firms. So now we have this great national team, offices across the country, about 100 staff that really offer full service communications, everything from communications planning and deep public engagement to design, digital creative, crisis, reputation management, you name it, we do it, and we do it all in-house. And one of the really unique things about the work that we do in Western Canada is we also have deep roots and experience in behavioral change and public health. So doing a lot in tobacco cessation, alcohol awareness, harm reduction, tuberculosis education in Northern Canada. So a lot of really interesting work around using the power of communications to help increase well-being and improve health outcomes in smaller remote communities.
Wow, wonderful. That's great. And who are your other clients? What other sectors are you involved in?
So in Western Canada, a lot of public service work. So we do a lot of engagement work for municipalities, City of Calgary, Vancouver, Edmonton, a lot on major infrastructure projects. And so, for example, we worked on the referendum around the Calgary Olympic bid, supporting the City of Calgary and the work that they did there. Do a lot of work on BC flood and wildfire work. We did a significant amount of work, mobility pricing within the northern mainland of BC, or sorry, the southern mainland. So a lot of work in terms of reaching out and genuine public engagement, really finding out what citizens feel about major policy initiatives, transportation infrastructure projects, things like climate change, adaptation and response. So that's a really interesting part of the work, because you really are diving into both aspects, the communications that supports that kind of engagement and make sure that you have all of the citizenry represented, that people who maybe don't have access to some of the engagement tools that are used still have an opportunity to have their voice heard. And I think that's something that really for us was a significant strength coming out of the COVID response and the inability to do traditional engagement in an in-person format.
Right. Well, that's great. And tell me how you got into the PR and communications world. What's your story?
Oh my gosh, it's an interesting story. For me, I always had an interest in writing. I always had an interest in journalism. And out of high school, I won a military scholarship to join the Navy. I was very excited. It was something I really wanted to do. And they put me through all this career testing, and they had me slotted for public affairs. And this was in the 80s. I didn't know what public affairs was, but if it was my ticket in, I was good. And just after I graduated high school, I was brought in for a medical exam, and I flunked my eye exam. And so my plan was gone. So I decided to go to university and just take English and political science and see what would happen. I ended up just kind of veering towards jobs that had a significant writing component. So worked for a newspaper, worked for some members of the Legislative Assembly back east. I'm originally from Halifax. And then ended up moving with one of my MLAs when he became a cabinet minister, and just continued to do his speech writing, all of his press work. And then in 1998, Swiss Air crashed off the coast of Nova Scotia. And we were, a small province inundated with international media all of a sudden. And even though as political staff, I was asked to take a communications role to support the media relations response. After doing that for 6 months, I came back out and realized that was where my heart was. My heart was really in communications, and that started, a 26-year career in public service communications, working for provincial and federal governments until I made the leap to join Argyle just last year.
Right, right. And you have a son who's also who's followed in your footsteps and is working in PR in Halifax. Is that correct?
Yes, and he works for the competition, but he's probably been one of my best coaches and mentors in making the transition to agency life. He was my shoulder when I was saying, I don't know if I can do this, when I was, stressing over the loss of my first RFP proposal. He's been a real cheerleader and a real support, because he's always worked in agency, and he, had an understanding of the culture and how it works that was deeper than the understanding I think I thought I had, being on the other side, being an in-house practitioner, and feeling like my interaction with agency professionals gave me a pretty good insight, but I had no idea.
Right, right. And such a big shift from the public sector to the private sector for sure. And Argyle has just been awarded Canada Agency of the Year, and last year it was also included on the Globe and Mail's 2019 fastest growing companies in Canada. So tell me about the Agency of the Year award, and congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you. I think that was an exciting one because it was agnostic of size. And I think Argyle had won quite a few mid-size agency awards previous to that. But I think this was an award that really, we felt, put us on the national stage, which was, part of the whole point of expanding our reach and being a national team. So I think it was a really exciting recognition of the work that we've been doing. And I think the power of leveraging, public relations, communications, reputation management for such a variety of different causes. We've worked on programs for 60s Scoop survivors. We've worked, representing Fort McKay in their fight to protect Moose Lake, and so a number of different issues that we've been able to leverage the power of communications to help these organizations support, but at the same time bringing CEOs closer to their stakeholders and consumers through thought leadership and brand management. So I think there's just been a really interesting approach. That's what drew me to Argyle. I'd worked with the CEO, Dan Tish, through my involvement with the Canadian Public Relations Society for years. He was somebody I admired. And I think what I always really liked about Argyle was how passionate they were about their clients, the work that they actually did day to day, and that they really believed that, communications can be such a source of social change and social good, and help companies really articulate their purpose. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you do some really interesting work. And so for the last while, you've also been involved in the Canadian Public Relations Society National Task Force on Ethical Public Relations. How did that, why was that task force struck? What was the reason behind that?
So that actually, it was a bit of a long genesis. In 2017, I was the national president of CPRS, and we actually engaged Dan Tish to write a white paper about the future of PR. We really wanted to see where Canadian PR professionals thought the profession was going, and then align that with, were we doing the right things as a professional association to support PR professionals across the country? And so one of the things that came out really clearly in a year-long consultation process that Colleen Killingsworth and I managed was that there was a sense that CPRs really needed to be the champion, the advocate for ethical PR, and that there was a real appetite. Now, if you remember, this was around the time the term alternative facts and fake news started really hitting the forefront. We were dealing with, a conversation about public relations and its role that was really, I think, professionals thought that was damaging to what we actually did day to day with our clients. So we, as I moved through that process, I was asked by Victor Frisnick, the current president, if I would lead this task force on ethical public relations. So it's been really, really exciting. We've done some interesting things. We've worked with CIPR out of the UK, which is our equivalent in the UK. We brought, for example, their version of an ethical decision tree. So you can go through some of the questions that you might find you're being asked, things you're being asked to do, advice you're being asked to give, and whether or not that does pass the ethical lens. And then what do you do if it doesn't? And you have a number of options available to you through this tree. And some of it is you can call a fellow. There was a group of us that have volunteered and said, give us a call. Our number's on here. If you're struggling with something, we can help walk you through it. We've launched a monthly podcast called PR Matters, and that's where we ask senior practitioners across the country, how does ethical PR show up in your day-to-day work? What does that mean to you? We are looking at things like a PR registry where you as a member can be recorded as somebody that's signed on to a professional code of conduct. And we're also looking at updating that professional code of conduct to reflect some of the realities we're seeing in PR today, everything from how do you manage artificial intelligence to how do we ensure that our push for equity and inclusion, our push to lead an anti-racism dialogue is also rooted in ethical PR. And what does that mean for practitioners and the advice that they're giving? So continuing to provide those tools that PR professionals can grab and use and find some value in, and continue to have that conversation, because I think it's like anything else. If you're not talking about it, then you're really doing it a disservice. So even just opening that up and having those conversations about what is ethical PR, what isn't ethical PR, and that difference, which can seem subtle. Sometimes, find my advice not being taken may be an ego hit, but it may not be unethical. It may be bad PR practice. It may not be the best thing an organization can do in its own interests, but is it really, truly an unethical move?
That's great. So you provide some tools that really help PR specialists to determine if what they're doing is unethical or ethical, and how to differentiate and find out where that line is that can sometimes easily be crossed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
And
great.
I had a colleague that once told me, understand where that line is early, because you'll be across it before you realize. And if you always have your sight on, reading up on what's ethical, reading up on what's acceptable, if you know that going in, you're just going to be far better served than if you're kind of just going along with, little things that you're being asked to do. Here's the humanity of COVID with my dog dancing in the background. But it's so important, I think as a professional to just, read up, try and keep up on what's the latest ethical challenge in public relations, because it does shift as expectations change.
Yeah, and there's also reduced trust in organizations and so on, and so it's really important for PR specialists to be aware of where that line is, and to be able to advise their clients on what's ethical and what's not, and so that's great that that's going on right now. And so also we're in the middle of, speaking of COVID, we're in the middle of this, and how's that impacted your work at Argyle?
Well, one of the advantages I think of being a newly formed national team with offices across the country is we were using the tools, Zoom and Slack and all of these collaboration tools we were using because we were trying to work across these cities. So that I think helped us internally. But one of the things we noticed early on was, having so many engagement clients that at the outset, I think there was okay, we'll just wait. We'll just pull back on this engagement work. We'll ride it out. And then as COVID continued and progressed, we saw more and more clients saying, okay, we need some creative alternative ways of engaging people. So we launched a webinar early on about the challenges and how you could use alternative engagement. Everything from smaller Zoom workshops to, really, we just recently did one where we had to do physically distant engagement for a group that really felt they needed to do in-person engagement. So making sure you're following different public health rules. So finding those ways to be inclusive, to still get the results that you're looking for, making sure people still have an opportunity to provide meaningful feedback on policies and projects. That's been a real challenge. And it's really required us to do some fast thinking and be creative in how we approach our work and how we continue to explore different and new ideas for our clients. But I think what it's done is it's fast-tracked some of these tools that were seen as niche tools or nice to have tools. I think now people are seeing them as just really valuable parts of the engagement process. I don't think it will ever 100% replace some of those face-to-face pieces, but I think in the interim, it's a way to continue to stay connected for sure.
Right. And what opportunities? There's always opportunities that come out of every crisis. Do you see anything, any opportunities for Argyle, things that you didn't think perhaps were possible before this crisis?
I think for us, it really fast tracked this national integration that we were looking for. I think we've broken barriers of, city wide practices to working certainly in Western Canada more as a regional team, and really working to understand how we can best serve clients in Western Canada. I think it's also, given an opportunity to reach out with thought leadership and to provide value to clients. So, we've done a number of webinars. Our CEO just recently did a webinar for clients and some of our contacts on, that road to recovery. What does that look like? What do stakeholders expect? What do customers expect? What do employees expect of their employers? And I think, providing some of those thought-provoking places to have that conversation without the immediate sales pitch, giving something to your clients, providing value and providing thought leadership that helps them in terms of some of the decisions that they're trying to make in managing this for their own employees. I think that's been a real opportunity. I think coming out of this, I think corporations are really going to be judged by how did you contribute? How did you take your skill set and what you offer to contribute rather than capitalize? And I think I'm really proud that Argyle's done a really good job at trying to find those ways to contribute.
Right. That was actually my next question. What's your advice to, because reputation and communications are so important, especially at this time. What's your advice to business leaders and organizations as we start to reopen and hopefully move through this?
I think one of the interesting things is as this settles in to be something that, for at least the medium term is going to be with us for a while. I think there was a crisis response where you abandon kind of your strategic plan and all of your targets, and you just are focused 100% on responding to what's in front of you. And unlike a normal crisis, like a flood or a natural disaster, that ends, there's an end point, and then you go back to recovery and picking it up. And I think for corporations, they are going to be going through a period of continuing to respond while trying to pick up those pieces of the recovery. And I think the temptation can be, picking up that strategic plan and seeing what does it look like, or abandoning, going to the other end and abandoning it for continuing to recover. And I think there's an opportunity for companies to be somewhere in the middle, to really look at what can we lead, and what can we advocate for in the next 6 to 18 months? How can we look at our strategy and say, you know, what is our offering? Where is our strength? But where is there a new opportunity for us to be leaders, for us to be advocates for something? And that may be for your own employees. It may be as simple as saying, you know, there's an opportunity for us to advocate for our employees and what they're going through in terms of having flexible return to the office. I hate the term return to work. I like that it's return to office. um, to find a way to add that value and turn that into something that will be longer lasting in the relationship with your, whether they're stakeholders, whether it's your clients or potential consumers. And I think those are the companies that will come out of this quite successful, where they found something they can add a value, and that they were open and generous with their talent and their skill in those first few months when people really, really needed it. And so I think it's that blend of that, you know, there'll be time where we'll go back to these, you know, really nice three-year strategic plans. But I think that's probably going to be, you know, 18 months down the road.
Right. That's great advice. And so that brings us to the end of the interview, Kim. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think I just, you know, really want to thank you for doing this. And I think in that terms of, you know, adding value and sharing and providing opportunities to be part of that conversation. I've been so impressed with some of the pieces coming out of Calgary, and, you know, the opportunities to be part of conversations, whether that's through my involvement with Lean In or some of the work that we're seeing come out of organizations like the YW Calgary, with some of the mindfulness tools that they've been providing. And I think it's really been interesting. I'm really looking forward to continuing to follow your series and learn more about what people are doing to, you know, continue to be resilient and to take care of the community as we move through this.
That's great. Thank you, Kim. And thank you for joining us. Where can people reach you if they want to get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also, you can link to me right through the Argyle website at argylepr.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for joining us. And thank you to everyone for watching the COVID Chronicles, and stay safe and healthy and Calgary strong.